Hello, viewers. Welcome to yet another episode of NatStrat Conversations. My name is Pankaj Saran. I'm convener of NatStrat, and this is a program in which we bring you insightful conversations with well-known experts and other strategic thinkers on issues relating to India's national security, foreign policy, and technology. This episode is devoted to the Indian national security challenges as they exist today and what lies in the future for India. This is a big subject, but we will try and break it down for you so that it makes sense to you and to everyone else who's interested in following India's national security strategies and the thinking that goes behind it. It is interesting to note that 2023 actually marks 25 years of the establishment of the Indian national security apparatus. You would recall that in 1998, India conducted its nuclear tests and became a nuclear weapon state. It's been 25 years since then. And 1998 was when the National Security Council Secretariat was established. The post of the National Security Advisor was established. And in this period of 25 years, a lot has happened. India has so far had 5 National Security Advisors, and we've had 8 chairmen of the National Security Advisory Board. And I will soon introduce you to the current chairman of the National Security Advisory Board, Ambassador PS Raghavan. But before we do that and get into the conversation, just a quick bird's eye view of what these 25 years have meant for India and the world. You recall that in 1998, India went nuclear. In 1999, India was involved in the Kargil war with Pakistan. Soon thereafter, we faced a full-fledged terrorist attack against India in the parliament in 2001 and in Mumbai on 26 November 2008. 2001 was also the year in which we saw the 9/11 attacks against the iconic World Trade Center. And so the whole decade of the 2000s was actually a decade of the war against terrorism launched by the United States and its Western allies. We saw in the West Asian theater a complete domino effect of changes in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria. All of them were then came to be described by the Western strategic community as the so-called Arab Spring. But even as this was going on, we saw how in 2008, the world faced its biggest financial and economic crisis. There was a crisis of capitalism and a crisis of globalization. And that gave rise to the G20. And for the next many, many years, the world was actually dealing and grappling with how to revive a broken economy and how to restore faith in the processes of globalization. But as soon as we passed that, we saw what we have witnessed in 2020, another crisis, this time related to the COVID pandemic. And subsequently, we are today seeing a virtual breakdown of the European security architecture because of the Ukraine conflict. So the world has seen many things, but so has our region. In fact, today what we are witnessing is the economic implosion of Pakistan and of course of Sri Lanka. We are seeing how in Afghanistan, the Taliban came to power, the Taliban were ousted, there was a 20-year war, and the Taliban is back in power in Afghanistan. We are also witnessed in the last 25 years the phenomenal growth in the Indian economy from a GDP of about $450 billion in the year 2000. Today, India's GDP stands at more than $3 trillion, and it is widely estimated, and it is a reasonable estimate, that we should be in the top 3 economies in the next 2 to 3 years in terms of current projections of growth. So a lot has happened in these 25 years. The role of the national security apparatus, therefore, has necessarily transformed. So against this background, I have great pleasure in introducing to you our guest for today, Ambassador PS Raghavan, who's chairman of the National Security Advisory Board. A little bit about him before we begin to get his views on so many different issues. Veteran diplomat with more than 45 years of experience in diplomacy, in national security, has worked in the Prime Minister's office has been associated with the National Security Advisory Board for about 6 years. He has been privy to and instrumental in many of the institutional reforms of the national security structures in India. He has written widely on strategic issues, on foreign policy issues, and of course, he was Ambassador of India to Russia at a very sensitive time. So, welcome, Raghavan, to this show, and thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to a good conversation with you.
Thank you very much, Pankaj. Thanks for having me here at this forum, and for the most fulsome introduction that you gave to me. But let me start by first congratulating you on what you have done with NatStrat.
Thank you.
In a relatively small period of time, you have managed to introduce a range of strategic issues on this platform, and with a depth of coverage of these issues as well. So I congratulate you on this job, and I think on the job very well done already.
Thank you.
Even as you are in the initial stages really of developing this platform. So all the best for future. What do you want me to start on at the moment? Tell me.
No, I was thinking to start off and to make things easy for our viewers and to put it in simple terms. Firstly, a little bit about your personal, having gone through so much of your career, watching so much and seeing so much. How has it been for you, this journey as an Indian diplomat, as an Indian strategic thinker, when you look back? And what kind of words of advice would you have for all of them out there who are deciding whether diplomacy is a profession of choice? And are there any moments or episodes or issues in your vast career which you might like to recollect for us briefly before we get on to other bigger issues?
Thank you very much. It's a good question to start with. So I can start with a pitch for the Indian Foreign Service.
That's right.
Which has kept both you and me not only gainfully employed for so many years, but also has given us so many opportunities for exposure not only to the world, but to strategic thinking, to the development of our foreign policy. And let's face it, foreign policy cannot be divorced from the national security policy. Foreign policy is basically meant to promote the national security interests of the country.
Absolutely.
You will agree with me on that. So I think I've had a wonderful journey through various postings that I have had during my career. You mentioned the Prime Minister's office. That was a great experience. There was even a stint I did with the Indian peacekeeping force in Sri Lanka in the middle of a war which was going on there.
Yeah.
Another exciting and a very educative stint, which gave me an insight into national security challenges as well. But, if you look at what we as diplomats go through, such a varied experience in varied parts of the world, if you were to ask me what are the memorable experiences, there are too many of them. But what I'll do for the sake of brevity, I'll just
give us at least one or two.
Yes, I'll just identify 2 or 3 different kinds of issues that we deal with.
Fair enough.
You start with, I'll start with South Africa, not necessarily in any particular order, but I'll start with South Africa. I was there at a time when South Africa was just emerging from the apartheid system, when in fact it had not fully emerged from the apartheid system.
Right.
The remnants of it were there even during Nelson Mandela's first presidency. And a simple case, that was a time when Hansi Cronje, the captain of the South African cricket team, had been caught by the police in India of having been involved in match fixing.
Right.
Now, Hansi Cronje was a legend. He was an idol in South Africa. And they could not wrap their heads around the fact that India, which they still felt was some backward developing country, had actually discovered something against their idol.
Correct.
And brought their idol down to earth. Now, it's a very strange thing, captain of a cricket team being caught doing match fixing, that it should not, it becomes an issue in the bilateral relations between nations.
Correct.
But you can't imagine the amount of work we had to do to first tell them that, look, this was just a police operation. It was not an operation which was meant to damage India-South Africa relations. And you guys have to bring a sense of balance into this whole thing. The kind of work that we had to do in public relations with the government of that country. So, it's something which people don't normally associate with the work of a diplomat. And yet it's challenging, it's interesting, and eventually if you do manage to bring some parity in the relationship,
So,
makes you happy.
in your estimation, I mean, is there any specific skill which an Indian diplomat has to possess to be successful? I mean, based on what you just said, I mean, there are universal skills, but anything special for as far as India is concerned, an Indian diplomat trying to weave his way through?
Yeah, but universal skills are very important. You need to know, you need to understand the country you're operating in, you need to understand the environment you're operating in, you need to listen rather than talk.
Right.
I mean, these are universal characteristics of a diplomat. You need to start from a position of understanding their position.
Correct.
Before you push your position. Now, Indian diplomacy, again, it's the same. You and I have gone through very similar experiences. I think we have gone, during the course of our career, we have gone through a situation where India has been viewed very differently.
Yeah.
I can tell you, I mean, I was posted in London, for example, in 1991. If at that time I sought a meeting for an Indian minister with a UK minister, I'd be told, it takes about 2 weeks for you to get an appointment, to seek an appointment. Yeah. Today I can get that appointment in 2 days.
Correct. Yeah.
So it shows the way in which India has been perceived differently. So an Indian diplomat has to be sensitive to how India is viewed in that country, and he has to tailor his approaches to that.
Yeah.
And as I said, in South Africa, we were still in a position where we were not viewed the way we are today.
Correct.
Nobody would have reacted the way they did at that time. Today.
Yeah.
So an Indian diplomat has to tailor his approach to the way India is being seen, and of course he has to try to make sure that India is being seen as it is rather than as their prejudices dictate.
Right. Absolutely. He has to correct those prejudices. But let me kind of take you from South Africa and Hansie Cronje to 1998 to a more serious situation where we went nuclear. And you were in the thick
still
of
in South Africa. I was still in South Africa
really?
at that time.
I thought you were in the Prime Minister's office.
Not yet.
Oh, not
yet.
Okay.
So I was.
But you dealt with the aftermath.
Yes, but aftermath in South Africa itself, because they were extremely annoyed that we did not tell them in advance that we were going to do the nuclear test. And they did not believe me when I said not more than 5 people in India knew about the nuclear test before. So we could not be briefing other countries, however close they were.
Sure.
So anyway, this was a major issue for all of us.
No, but you were very much part of the whole birth of the national security apparatus.
Yes, after that, when I joined the Prime Minister's office, I was involved, as you know, in the various processes governing the setting up of the National Security Council Secretariat, the functioning of the National Security Advisory Board, and of course, various consequences of our nuclear tests and our becoming a nuclear weapon power in the Prime Minister's office, with the various structures that were set up in order to govern the systems. So this was very much part of my an exciting part of my responsibilities in PMO.
Sure. But I mean, it's been 25 years, and and you're aware of the fact that there is a lot of criticism both in India and in some parts of the world, that a country of India's size and systemic relevance and significance still does not have a national security strategy. So you've created the institutions, but you actually have not converted it into some kind of a coherent, let's say, a framework or a paper which can be put across to different sections within and outside the country, which explains how India believes, how India thinks, and about the current situation, and what are its and how it views the future of the world.
I would say that to say India doesn't have a national security strategy would be a considerable exaggeration. You see, you go back to the national security apparatus itself. There is a very explicit recognition over the years, and particularly strengthened now after, as you know, the National Security Council Secretariat was restructured in 2019. Yes. There is a very clear recognition of the various elements of national security that require focus and that require coordination. So, well before many of these things were thought about in other countries, we identified even areas like technology security, environment security, energy security, economic security, and food security as part of mainstream security issues.
Yes.
And as you know, the National Security Council Secretariat has verticals which deal with these issues. So
Right.
the need for a coordinated, coherent approach to national security is something that we articulated over the years. And arising out of that are a set of policies that actually create the national security strategy. What you are saying, and what a number of others are saying, is that we have not put it down on a piece of paper that we have published to the world. So that is actually a projection of a national security strategy, the absence of a projection of a national security strategy, rather than the absence of an existence of one. So I think we should make a distinction between that.
Right.
But efforts are constantly on. In the National Security Advisory Board, we have been constantly, shall we say, counseling the government of the need for a public projection as well, given India's, as you said, given India's position in the world today, India's stature in the world, and our strategic ambitions, our strategic possibilities. I think the time has come for us to put out a national security strategy document into the public domain. I think it is work in progress, and that will probably happen sooner rather than later.
That's fantastic, probably breaking news, but I'll leave it at that. But let me shift to another aspect of this whole discussion. The biggest beneficiary of the current international order in terms of the economy and even the institutions has without doubt been China. If you look at from 2008 to 2023, in the last 15 years, it's the only country whose GDP has tripled from what it was. Today, we are seeing a visible breakdown of the European security architecture that was built after the end of the Cold War and which had also taken a different form after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. You are seeing other various processes underway in the world. You are seeing a general decline in the salience of terrorism, but an increase in other non-traditional threats to security. My question to you is, in the midst of this change and to some extent global uncertainty about what the future holds with the rise of China and the US pushback, etc., do you think India is in a strategic sweet spot?
I would say that India has both opportunities and challenges in this situation. And if you look at it, the post-Cold War world, by the way, I would slightly differ on the subject of European security architecture. I would say that the European security architecture, which was sought to be established or which was believed in at the end of the Cold War, was a mere extrapolation of the Cold War architecture, and that is why it did not work.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you have a war in Ukraine today.
Yeah.
But more importantly, actually, we have not paid attention to the consequences of the end of the Cold War, the consequences of globalization, and the consequences of the technology revolution that has taken place. We have not paid attention to them and incorporated them into our efforts to create a new world order, which includes the European security architecture, of course. And so you have today a fragmented world order. You don't have a world order to talk of.
Yeah.
When people talk of a rules-based order, everyone means what he wants as a rules-based order. His rules. So this is the fragmented world which creates the threats that you mentioned. You have a war in Ukraine. You have US-China tensions. You have India-China tensions on our border. You have an Iranian nuclear threat waiting to happen, a South Korean nuclear threat which has happened, which people refuse to recognize. Mm-hmm. So this is a kind of an external threat situation that we are facing, which is that is one prism through which India has to see the threats which it has to deal with. But the other side of it is this change in the post-Cold War fragmentation. The fragmentation of the post-Cold War order has also resulted in a number of middle powers rising to take advantage of globalization, to take advantage of opening up of relationships, take advantage of technology, to acquire a certain amount of economic influence, a certain amount of political strength, regional influence, to be able to, therefore, try to get their interests accommodated in the world order. And India, in that sense, is really in a sweet spot because India has really taken advantage. And you mentioned the nuclear test right in the beginning. I think the nuclear tests were a very important indication of a country which was willing to take its security interests into its own hands, rather than trying to seek a nuclear umbrella or some other or a defense alliance in which it could hide itself.
Right.
That globalization, the technology revolution in which we were very much in the forefront, and of course our strategic location astride the Indian Ocean, our demography, our size of our economy. You take this whole lot put together.
Yeah.
This gives us the sweet spot where we can try to take advantage of the opportunities.
Right.
And combined with that is our foreign policy and national security policy in the last many years has shown the ability to take risks in order to exploit these opportunities.
But is the risk-taking appetite more today than it was in the past?
Without doubt.
Yeah. So
Without
we are
doubt.
more ambitious.
You see, you have to take risks to fulfill your ambition. We have been forthright in actually projecting our ambitions. We have been forthright in projecting our strengths. We have gone out and created connections which did not exist for the last many years. You look at West Asia, to take just one example.
So would you say, for example, US, Russia, China, Europe, West Asia, with all these centers of power, have we expanded the boundaries of our cooperation with each one of them? I mean, we have been less hesitant in terms of going a further distance with, say, the United States or with Europe or with West Asia or with Russia. China we can discuss separately. But is that a characteristic where it actually reflects this degree of this point about risk-taking, ambition, and a certain self-image about ourselves, that you are in a position where the situation demands that you push more in every sector, whether it is technology or economy or investment or even security. I would not call them alliances, but partnerships. I mean, that seems to be happening.
You're absolutely right. The expression strategic autonomy has somehow fallen into disrepute because people tend to assign strategic autonomy a meaning to strategic autonomy that you are seeking to somehow challenge a world order or to challenge a rules-based order. But if you use this expression in the sense in which it was originally intended, what are you trying to do? What are we trying to do as a country? We are trying to explore the limits and the boundaries of our freedom of action.
Yeah, correct.
And in doing so, you have discovered that you have far more freedom of action than you thought some time back. And that is what leads to your being able to simultaneously expand relations with the US, UK, other countries without it impacting on some of your earlier relationships, of being able to explain to one set of your partners why you are pursuing relations with another set of your partners. And also being able to explain to them that, look, what we are doing with one set of partners does not impact your interests. We are not in any way, and that's where if you want to talk about the Russia-Ukraine war, that's where it is. And we keep explaining to our partners that, look, whatever we may be doing with Russia, it has to do with geopolitics. It has to do with Eurasian, our position in the Eurasian space. But we are in no way impacting on the interests of Ukraine and the West in doing what we are doing. And that is where we should be distinguishing what we are doing with what China is doing.
Correct. No, when it comes to China, what I want you to talk about is a little bit about, in your opinion, what do you think is today the currency of national power? I mean, we've gone through this evolution over time, but, I want to hear from you what you think is that secret magic potion which is going to guarantee or determine your national security imperatives. And if you are able to identify that, the follow-up issue is going to be whether we are on track or on course to achieve those and realize those instruments of power or the secret of that particular power.
I don't think there is a magic potion, and I don't think it is secret either. Essentially, if you have to be a major power, a country has to have domestic economic strength. It has to be, of course, we have other advantages. As I said, we have strategic advantages of size, demography, geography, etc., etc. But all of that can be converted into making India a major power if our economic strength grows. And that our Prime Minister has been saying this repeatedly. What do you want to do? You want to make India into a developed country in the foreseeable time frame. A developed country, a strong country, with all the other natural advantages that India has, is a sure formula for achieving national power, international power, to become a big power on the international arena. I think it's as simple as that, really.
No, is it? I mean, you talked about the economy, but supposing I were to ask you, what about internal stability? We have fault lines in our country. And secondly, I noticed you didn't talk about technology when you discuss the what will contribute to guaranteeing national security or power. So can you elaborate on these aspects? I mean, going beyond say your gross domestic product kind of figure.
Yes. You know, we talk about economic strength in the matter of growth as well as development, as well as equitable development. And when you talk about equitable development, you are talking about dealing with domestic internal fault lines in the country. Today, when you are talking about economic and growth and development, technology is inextricably linked to that. If you do not have technological self-sufficiency, and if you do not have a leadership role in technology, if you're not able to absorb technology into the economic processes as well as into your security processes, you do not achieve this.
Yeah.
So that is inbuilt. Technology is really one of the most important requirements, but it is an important requirement in both this, in creating domestic economic growth, equitable development, as well as external security.
Yeah. No, I see that. I mean, it is going to be, but you know, the other thing which we have seen in the last few years, not just the pandemic, but the weaponization of different aspects of our day-to-day life, you know, whether it is financial flows, whether it is the currency in which you trade, or whether it is investments or cross-banking transactions. So things that we took for granted today are being weaponized by those who control these levers. Do you think there is a case for India to actually watch this closely and also think about how we can insulate ourselves from such possible threats to our security?
Without doubt, without doubt. You know, what you're seeing is, as you rightly say, it's a weaponization. It's a weaponization of virtually every institution and mechanism of multilateralism and of globalization. And
Yeah.
this is what you are responding to. And this is what you need to do. And there are multiple ways, in fact, in which you are proceeding with this, in which India is proceeding with this. One is, of course, creating internal capacity, both to resist it and to create mechanisms which will circumvent some of these. The other is to create, say, for want of a better expression, coalition of the willing coalition of like-minded partners, to see how you can protect yourselves in smaller groups. You can promote your interests and protect your interests, protect yourself against some of these disruptions. So all of which we are doing. And we are doing it actually both with groups of developed countries as well as groups of developing countries.
No, I agree. In fact, I personally believe that the whole concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat or a self-reliant nation is not autarkic, but it is much more than that. And I think this was the fundamental takeaway from the COVID pandemic. And I think really this is the foundational basis for developing our capabilities to deal with future threats. And in that context, how do you think we are doing in terms of being future ready to meet future threats? Because they are coming to you from both traditional sources and non-traditional, including the whole arena of information warfare. And you know it, and you know we've discussed this offline. Are you? So, is there consciousness in the government apparatus? And I'm sure there is actually. But how do you assess how we stand today?
This is where actually technology plays the biggest role. In every aspect of this, you need to be able to harness and develop the right kind of technology in order to firstly anticipate, counter,
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
and develop the future ready systems
Yeah.
and structures for it. And then I think the government is very much conscious of it.
Yeah.
You see actually a number of initiatives that have been taken in recent times to look at technology development within the country, to look at technology partnerships. If you look at the ISET initiative with the US, and the ISET has actually generated interest from other countries in having similar partnerships with India. So I think it's both. It's domestic development as well as external partnership, which will take us forward in this.
So, just last words, because we're running out of time. On the basis of everything we've talked about, the big question, do you think India has a grand strategy? Do you think India needs a grand strategy?
A grand strategy has to develop from
Henry Kissinger.
No. A grand strategy has to develop from one's ambitions for oneself within the country, and it has to develop from there. So, you have national strength. You become a developed country. You thereby acquire influence in your region, and then you expand outwards to protect and further your interests. Well, a grand strategy has to be built on that. I don't think a grand strategy can be spelt out before you reach various stages along this path.
Yeah, I hear you. India first, and something like that. I think that's a great way of putting it, because it's complex and it requires another episode with you. But thank you so much, Raghavan, for joining us, for spending your valuable time on with NatStrat Conversations. It's a delight. Thank you so much, viewers. That's all we have time for. But I hope you enjoyed this freewheeling conversation. Some of it was abstract, but some of it was rooted in very, very concrete issues. We didn't have time to go into each one of them, but this gives you a kind of a bird's eye view of what are the issues that are in the minds of Indian strategic planners and those who influence and advise the national security apparatus. Thank you so much for watching us. Till our next episode, goodbye.